Hello, the Guardians 300, keeping the peace. This is Mick. I just thought I'd put a quick note on here. It's been really interesting today. I received a phone call from a guy called Ben, who is one of the Guardian reporters, from a reporter from the Guardian newspaper. And of course, he said that there's an ongoing study at the moment, or there is they're looking at lines of reporting around how some of the ministers are being given death threats, and that in reality he believes that the Guardians 300 is accommodating some of those ideas, which I find really interesting, because even from a 40-minute conversation, he seemed to settle on a number of things. So it won't surprise me if all he has to say about the Guardians 300 is that we can't really control what people put on there. So that's one of the messages I believe he's going to give. The other thing is that we still believe in freedom of speech. That's another message that he's going to give. He's going to talk about the gallows. He's going to talk about treason, and he's going to talk about how we are possibly accommodating this by allowing people to put posts on our channel. Now, I find it really, really interesting, because I've posted the 3 posts that he's talking about in his email, but what he also tries to do is to sort of direct the conversation towards me stating things that he could quote. Now, after this 40-minute conversation, because I've put the recording as part of this video, you'll hear the recording, so you've got some context to the conversation, and I recorded the whole conversation so that you could see that out of 40 minutes of dialogue with someone, just how they take the messages that they want the people to hear for the purpose that they want to serve. So if he'd have reported on this justly and in a balanced way, you would hear my representation of what the Guardians 300 is about, which is about peace and honour. And it's about training people in peace and honour so that we can collaborate with the police force, which is all in the documentation. It's all there. It's all part of the training. Because that's what we want. We want more collaboration. We want to get back to our communities. And essentially, we also want to allow people to understand through education that we have freedoms that governments don't give to us. That they are ours by right of birth. So one of the posts that he refers to is from someone that basically talks about, you know, you say revenge, I say justification for crimes against humanity, the gallows for this cook, yeah? And they're talking clearly about someone. It doesn't really make clear who they're talking about. But essentially, from a common law perspective, if someone commits a crime that is unwarranted, then simply somebody goes to the gallows, basically, because a court of law would literally send them there. I don't see any reference to someone individually. In fact, it does mention Whitty on here. I don't see anyone actually saying that they will do this to Whitty. So for me, that's not a threat. That's just a statement of what would happen to someone, and it's an opinion of what should happen to someone if they've committed crimes against humanity. How is that wrong, is my question. So the other post is basically again about Chris Whitty, which says that he gave orders, and he puts a full link on here. So there's actually no personal comment on this whatsoever, and you'll see these posts because they're part of this video. There's no personal comment on there whatsoever. And then the other post is from a guy that basically talks about treason, and it's still carrying a penalty of death. Well, you'd have to look at the common law court to understand the process that somebody would get to get to that point. That's a common law court thing. It's nothing to do with this individual, and no one is making any threats. I don't see on any level when someone writes, the time will come when UK police, UK military, and UK military veterans will have to decide whether their oath is to the UK people or to the monarch / establishment. I know my oath as a military veteran is to my country, the UK and its people, and no one else. Now, I don't see any direct threat towards Chris Whitty on that message, unless I'm completely missing the point. Because my oath actually was to the people. And it's worth remembering that the police us by consent, and the government govern us by consent. If we don't give consent, then what they do is no longer lawful. And of course, what these guys are worried about, I believe, at this moment in time, is people finding out the law, them understanding what is legal and what is lawful, and being able to differentiate between those two things. We will always stand in peace and honour. And I said this repeatedly when this guy talked to me. You can hear the recording yourself. But I can guarantee the 3 messages he's going to give is that we don't monitor what goes on the site. We don't, and that we encourage a level of freedom of speech, irrespective of whether it's hate or whether it's a threat. And I don't see any mention of an individual threat in any of these posts. So unless I'm completely missing the point, all this simply shows you is that the mainstream narrative still remains the same. And they are absolutely desperate and clutching at straws to outlaw what I consider to be organisations like us that are basically educating people in law and encouraging people to be more peaceful, more collaborative, and also to defend the freedoms of the people that we now represent. Because what he also found out as part of the dialogue is that the common law court is firmly established. It's established with the Prime Minister, with all the ministers and the chief constables. They know that we are training people in common law. And they know that we're producing peace constables for the purpose of collaboration. And what we're really, really hoping down the line is that the police force realise this, start to learn the law and actually want to join us. So that what we can then do is combine our forces for the purpose of the people. And it's no more simple than that. So all I can say is that if the mainstream media are that desperate for a story that they have to concoct imagined threats, because I don't see any threats in here, I simply see someone's opinion in a private group. And the analogy that he tried to use was someone running into a cinema shouting fire. Well, actually, that's a completely idiotic analogy because no one's doing that. What we're simply doing is posting something on a group that allows a level of freedom of speech, which is one of your inalienable freedoms. So what I want you to do is listen to the recording, because when the story comes out in The Guardian, there is no shadow of doubt in my mind that he's going to try and make us look like we're some form of group that are trying to hurt somebody. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not right. So Ben, I'm going to hold you to your word. I'm going to read The Guardian, but this is going out just so that people are aware of the context. Hello, Mick Stott.
Oh, hello, it's Ben here.
Hi, Ben, how are you?
Sorry I missed you.
No problem.
Very good. Thanks for calling me back.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm sorry to hear, got the wrong end of the stick. But that's the whole purpose of, kind of reaching out to you anyway. So, yeah, it'd be good to have a discussion.
Absolutely.
Did you get the email? Sorry for the length of it, but I kind of wanted to go into detail to ensure you knew where I was coming from.
Yeah, I didn't get the email actually, but
okay, well, can we talk about it now?
Yeah, anyway? we can absolutely. Yeah.
Background is obviously recent and kind of increasing concern about the safety and security of people like Chris Whitty and public figures like that. Whitty's been jostled on the street a number of times physically, and people have marched on what they believe to be his home. And then there are a plethora of examples of on a regular basis of essentially what appear to be quite explicit and clear death threats against him and other public figures.
Yeah.
Now, I suppose to separate this, I'm not saying you're making those threats in any way, and there's certainly no accusation that you endorse any of those threats or anything like that.
Well, I should think not, Ben, because I served 30 years in the British Army, mate. And I was at one of the most prestigious academies in the British Army, training officers to be gentlemen. Yeah. I held a staff officer appointment at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. I took William and Harry through their adventurous training mentorship. And numerous other.
You seem to have a pedigree for sure. I'm well aware of.
Well, and you see, I'm also a soldier, Ben.
Yeah, I suppose. Well, we do know that soldiers are. You're not one of those people. We also know soldiers are also capable of crimes and things like that. You're not one of them. Now, but where I'm coming from in that is that. You're, for example, discussion groups, among them those run by Guardians 300, do seem to be a platform for people voicing those death threats. Well,
one of the biggest challenges we have, Ben, is we have infiltrators coming onto our platforms. Right. So for me, that's a bigger issue, because we make it pretty clear from the off that we stand in peace and honour. You will never hear me say anything other than that. And the Guardians 300 is actually a gateway for people that want to train in common law. For you to even contemplate common law, you have to understand that it all comes from causing no harm, no injury, no loss, and being honourable in your contracts. Yeah. So essentially, if someone is going to say that people within the Guardians group are doing that, I'd like to know, if is there any evidence around where that person comes from, because they certainly don't belong to us, and anyone that joins our group has to swear an oath of peace and honour.
Yeah. Okay, I'll put it like this. I mean, what I have done is emailed you some of the, for example, the images. For example, there's people on Guardians 300 who say things like, you say revenge, I say justification for crimes against humanity to the gallows, or they say things like treason still carries a penalty of death, I believe.
Well, I can't speak for them, Ben.
No, absolutely.
But what I can say is that in any democracy, there is a freedom to speak, whether you like what they say or not. It doesn't mean that you're going to act on it or do anything about it or even condone it, So I'm sure there are lots of people in this world that have opinions around everything. Does that mean that you're responsible for their opinions? Ultimately, ultimately, the freedom to speak, Ben, is really important. And it doesn't mean that we have to like what some people say, but nor does it mean that we endorse it either.
Yeah, true. Well, I suppose freedom doesn't allow freedom to shout fire in a crowded cinema at one end of the scale, or at another end of the scale, actually to call for perhaps someone's murder or actually incite hatred towards a group of society. I mean, there are legally enforced limits on what people can and cannot say, to the extent when it does go into causing real world harm. So I suppose to get to the nub of it, I mean, should Guardians 300 be running a discussion group where this type of language is being espoused if you are unable to control it, unable to moderate it or delete it?
Well, I mean, what do we delete, Ben? Because ultimately, the bottom line is that when an infiltrator comes in onto the group, they post things to discredit us. That for me is a bigger issue. That's a bigger worry.
Okay.
Because we don't know where they come from. I mean, I'm very aware as ex-military that you have 77 Brigade, who is clearly a PsyOps team. So right. Unless you're going to deny that they exist, Ben.
No. I mean, I fully accept they exist. I mean,
So what's their role then, Ben?
What is their role?
Yeah.
In this, I don't know. Do you suspect they do have a role in, for example, posting false flag content on groups like Guardians 300?
Well, of course they do, and of course, anything that look. Let's look at some facts, Ben. Let's look at in 2020. Let's look in February how Ofcom stopped anyone that contradicted to the narrative. Now, I know of two judicial reviews that were run by Toby Green and Robin Tilbrook, that they put out judicial reviews because they couldn't work out why the alternative to that was actually being openly debated. And why would that be then, Ben? So the thing is, right, as much as I like to think that there's a fair reporting system, the challenge that I have is when Ofcom did that, what am I led to believe by that as an intelligent human being? As a man who actually went to war and fought for democracy. So I fought for freedom of speech, Ben. Now, equally, do I agree with anyone that offers violence to anyone? No, I don't, because ultimately, the whole premise of common law is cause no harm, no injury or loss, and be honourable in your contracts. Now, if you can tell me that every politician we're dealing with is also following that moral code, then I'm totally with you. But if they're not, then, people are not stupid. People are not silly. That they also read behaviour and watch behaviour. And if what you say doesn't match what you do, Ben, that makes you incongruent. It makes you someone that is incongruent and not trustworthy. Now, that's for the people to decide, mate. Not for me.
Fair enough. I mean, look, and I don't know if 77th Brigade are engaged in false flag operations or not domestically. I mean, they do seem to have an offensive capability, and when it comes to states like
Ben,
Russia...
I'm ex-military, mate. I'm ex-military. I could quote to you propaganda regimes that they put out with other countries. So please, what I'm going to say to you, mate, is I'm pretty experienced in this arena of behaviour. and pretty experienced in the arena of propaganda. Now, am I suggesting that they're misleading the whole people? I don't really know the answer to that, Ben. All I can do is monitor. All I can do is monitor what happens behaviourally, and see what adds up and what doesn't add up. And I will always stand in honour and peace. That's what I stand for.
Yes, 77th Brigade. I'm probably in agreement with you that I suspect they are engaged in, for example, offensive operations in relation to Russia. But what I do not have, and what I don't know, is if they are engaged in operations against their own people domestically in this country. But that's what you're saying is you suspect where people post content on discussion groups like Guardians 300 where there are death threats against Chris Whitty. It's always potentially planted.
I don't know. I don't know, Ben. All I'm saying is I'm sure. Sort of contemplating my navel with it all, because I ask, well, why would somebody even make a death threat in the first place? But I'm not that person, so I can't really talk from that person's perspective. You know, what I can do though is we can, you know, and we make it pretty clear that if anyone, and we have done, if anyone posts anything that we deem to be violent or offering violence to others, because we stay true to the basic tenet of common law, you know, which is cause no harm, injury, loss, and be honourable in your contracts. So that's our basic tenet. Now, sometimes things slip through the net, but once we see them, I've actively deleted messages, as have other people within the admin team, but sometimes they slip through and other people comment on them. I can't really control that to every extent. But then you've got to ask this, Ben, right? If you look at Facebook, what is Facebook currently doing with regards to censorship? So you know, I would say let's take a global look at everything, because equally we're doing our best to make sure that no one offers any violence, and we certainly would never support that on any level. Because as a soldier of 30 years, mate, I'm worldly wise. And equally, I didn't fight for aggression. I fought to maintain the freedoms of our people in the country. And now, if you can tell me that our freedoms are not being lost, then we've got some dialogue there. But ultimately, what I'm seeing is a loss of freedom. Now, I ask why. I ask why. And then I also ask, Ben, why has this situation never been academically, openly debated? Why has that happened? Why has that never happened? So all the decisions that are made by Sage, if I look at the minutes that Sage wrote, they never at any one point, and we looked at every minute that they produced, at no point did they ever recommend the wearing of face masks. So why was that then implemented by a government?
Okay.
So I can assure you, Ben, I can assure you, mate, I'm a very calculated person, and I'm a very learned person on a number of levels. You wouldn't be the SO2 at the Military Academy Sandhurst if you didn't have the capacity to analyse and read. So whenever I start to see behaviour, I look at both stories, Ben.
Yes.
And then I take a third perspective on it.
Just to return to something, I mean, you said why people make death threats. I mean, I suppose, and you're old enough to remember, Mr. Stott, probably the assassination of Olof Palme in Stockholm in 1974, and most recently, you'd have assassinations here like Joe Cox. So people make death threats because they hate people, and then it unfortunately leads to examples of loners and individuals who've become radicalized by hate speech, which they've become exposed to, and they take things into their own hands, and then we see consequences like that. So, I mean, maybe you're in agreement with me when when I say that there are concerns about people like Chris Whitty in the context of his behavior, the sort of escalation in hatred and treatment of him. And if you look at the experience of Joe Cox, who was basically assassinated by a far-right individual who was radicalised through exposure to material online and elsewhere.
Yeah, but all those are assumptions, Ben, because for me, I look for evidence. So when someone tries to generalise about how everyone is radicalised, I mean, I've been in the world of behavioural change for a number of years, so I can also see the parallels. When people are squeezing us behavioural in the UK, I can also see the parallels with, some of the other systems that I've seen within the military to produce elite troops. But you can't apply that to every individual mindset. You'd have to have dialogue with that individual to understand what motivates them and what directed their change of mindset. So I couldn't generalise and give you an opinion on everyone, because that would be folly, really. I mean, when I work with people individually around mindset, I want to know what makes them tick individually. You know, I can put out a message of peace and honour, but actually sometimes that might piss some people off. You know, for you to understand and create a generalisation, it then just ends up being a generalisation. I can't account for every individual. What I can do though is I can give my message out, which is peace and honour. That's what I can do, and that's every time I put anything out there, that's what I stand. And I've got, you know, ultimately, I served 30 years for this country to protect the inalienable freedoms of every individual in this country, whether they are black, white, yellow, red, whether they hate you, whether they don't hate you, whether they are Irish because they threw bricks at you in Northern Ireland. So what? You know, people have their own worlds. And ultimately, if our leaders were more clear in their messages, because, I mean, let's face it, Ben, if you look at the lack of clarity in the messages we've been given with masks, do wear masks, don't wear masks, you know, when you start to look at some of the court judgments against masks that have been established and yet never communicated to schools and other people that are in responsible positions, I've got to ask a question, why not?
We will have the opportunity, presumably, to vote those people out of office then.
Well, fantastic. So let's vote them out of office. You know, but equally, that doesn't equal. I mean, ultimately, if we stand in honour, Ben, right, and we understand the democratic, let's say, process, then that's fantastic. But equally, you know, these guys have got to be a little bit more clear in what they're saying. I mean, why do you think people are actually standing up and coming to the fore? What has Chris Whitty done, for instance, or Van Tam, or Boris? What have they done to warrant the meaning of their communication? Because I've learned this much in life, right, as a leader. The meaning of your communication is the response you get when you give your message. So if everyone's confused, there's a good chance the meaning of your communication is confusing. You know, so equally, you can't also, from Chris Whitty's perspective, he's got to own the meaning of his communication, just like we all do. He's a leader.
Just to put it in very blunt terms, he's a medical professional. When you've got cancer, you go to the doctor treats you. We're confronting a pandemic. He's a medical professional. He's telling us how this pandemic should be confronted. So that's what he's done, basically.
Absolutely.
That meaning of his. So that's what I say to that. I don't know. You're the kind of person. Mick, I probably could speak to you all day about that.
Yeah. So don't wear masks and then tell us to wear masks 4 months later, mate.
I mean, the main reason I wanted to contact you, and I think you've dealt with it, I think, quite comprehensively in terms of the response you've given me to what I've put to you about this sort of the language which you was on, which we found on Guardians 300. And the reason I wanted to put to you is because if we report death threats are being made against Chris Moody on a range of social media groups, and they include Guardians 300, you know, we want to ensure that we include your response, which is that.
Well, I appreciate that, Ben, because ultimately, right, we would never. So if you could put this on the record, please, we would never condone anything of that nature. We stand in peace and honour. And if by the way, if you can give us evidence of any of these individuals, we will automatically exclude them.
Yeah. So I mean, I've provided the screenshot. I mean, I suppose I've provided the screenshots of what they do, but it's not for us to tell you who they are. It's for you to. I suppose the argument is it's for you to police your own community.
Well, can you give that same message to Facebook, Ben?
Yeah, and if you're unable to do that, then perhaps you shouldn't set up those groups. I suppose that's the argument.
Well, Ben, put it this way, right? When you create a plan, you don't kill it because 2% of the team that you decide to create decide to not follow your narrative. And equally, if that 2% are people that are there to destroy your narrative, then the only thing you can do that's reasonable is exclude them from your group, and we'll happily do that. I've got no problem with that at all. But don't stop me from. Don't tell me that I can't create a group that's about peace, honour, and common law because of the 2% that want to try to bring me down, because that doesn't make any sense.
Okay. No, I hear you in that. I mean, just on the second thing, on just more about Guardians 300. I mean, I was interested in it as a group because it is about, as you said, peace and honour and common law. Yeah. And ostensibly, a large amount of what you do seem to be doing is training people in understanding what you refer to as common law.
Yeah.
And actually build numbers which would outnumber the police force, which you regard as acting unlawfully during this pandemic. And as I understand it, you're planning for a scenario when perhaps the police go in to tell businesses that they cannot open or cannot stay. So there would be constables of the peace there to confront the police.
No, I never use the word. I never use the word confront. In fact, a great idea would be this: why don't we have, which is what we've said. I used to work with the police, by the way, Ben. I've worked with Met Police.
Oh, I know that. Yes,
I've worked with Suffolk, and I've worked with Kent leadership colleges, and of course, so I understand the strengths and I understand the areas of development. And what saddens me is when you talk to a lot of the police, they seem to have forgot the premise of their law. So what I'm saying is, why don't we have a collaboration? Why don't we get as many police joining us so that we can actually then have a collaboration and people understand what is lawful? Because what is lawful, Ben, is that you have the right to feed your children. You have the right to gather peacefully. You have the right to speak freely. These are not rights that are given to you by any government. And if you actually look at common law, governments sit underneath the people because the people are sovereign. And so what's really got misconstrued here is that we vote the government in and they govern by consent. The police by consent. So
sure there's a lot of... Oh, sorry to cut across you there.
Those are the fundamentals, though, Ben. I mean, ultimately, right? Yeah. You know, when I decided to sign my life up, when I decided to go into combat, that's what I was defending, mate.
I'm sure there's a lot of police officers who would be swayed by what you say, making you a very compelling speaker who uses metaphors which I think are probably very
They're just true,
compelling
Ben.
and very encouraging to
They're
people.
Just true, Ben. That's what they are.
Yeah, I mean, the true ones are the best ones. But
of course they are, because they're truth.
Okay. The question is, if it came to the police force continuing to enact these unlawful laws, as you see, I mean, would Guardians 300 always go along with what the police force?
Of course we would. The whole essence of a common law constable is to collaborate with the existing police. That's the whole essence of it. If you look at what the common law court stands for, you are not exempt. No police constable. If you take it right back to basics, Ben, police were basically created to defend the people. They were voted in.
I'm familiar with Robert Peel, yes, and the
fantastic.
Original,
so basically, for me, there's a lack of education. Yeah. So let's fill the gap of education, because in democracy, what you do is your first line of any means of making a communication is you educate. So if you look at the education process, it's like there's clearly a gap of knowledge here. So why don't we fill that gap of knowledge so that we can collaborate and we can understand each other and we can assist each other?
The UK Column website, which is, as I understand it, an independent website down in Plymouth, it's run by a number of people, and I think you're familiar with the UK Column.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
They quote you as saying you envisage a steady rollout of these new forces of warriors who will go from being considered outlaws to the government to champions for humanity, as numbers of people waking up outnumber the current numbers in the police forces. And then they quote you as saying, unfortunately, there will be casualties along the way. And what did you mean by that?
Well, I don't remember saying that, to be honest.
Right. Okay.
So I don't know what they mean by casualties.
Okay, no, I'm just quoting what they had said. I mean, I can't be responsible.
Well, then I'll speak to them because I believe that's a misquote. I mean, okay. No, I don't know what they mean by casualties.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I thought it struck me when I read it, so I thought I'd put it to you. But essentially, I mean, that's the number four I wanted to ask you about.
Do you know, if you look at what is unlawful at the moment, so if you separate what's legal and what's lawful, you could argue that if you stop someone from moving freely, that's an unlawful situation. Now, I know that it can be justified by some of the acts that have been brought in, but equally, if you start to look at the underpinning evidence that warrants the reaction to this situation, whether it's proportionate or disproportionate, that's a matter of opinion. But actually, no one's been given the opportunity to debate that academically, openly. So in reality, we only hear one story. So, when you start talking about casualties, you could argue that all the people that were shifted from the hospitals into care homes from hospitals, well, what were they then?
clearly casualty.
Well, and what about all the 60% of people, according to the King's College study, that never made it to ICU because in reality they'd been given forced DNIR orders? So what are they?
Yeah, well, they could well be casualties. I mean,
so maybe you could argue the toss that,
yes.
that when we start to talk about casualties, what we're saying is the reaction to this proportionate to the threat? You know, so from my perspective, you know, I could certainly look at that and say, well, they are casualties. So
okay. I mean, the casualties. I think most people.
But if you're implying on any level, Ben, that we intend to have any form of confrontation with anyone, you'd be completely misguided.
Okay. No, I wanted to ask you, because I think a layperson's reading of a lot of what you say would lead somebody to suggest that is what you are suggesting.
So which persons are you talking about?
Well, I'm talking about the idea that you would assemble a group of people who would have an interpretation of the law which is different from the lawful forces of the state, and that the lawful forces of the state, the legally constituted police forces...
So we are lawful forces of the state, Ben.
Well,
do you understand the common law court concept is that
yes,
through a court order... I do understand.
No,
but hang on. I think you might need to understand something else. That a letter has simply gone out to the Prime Minister, all of his ministers, informing them that the people have asked for peace constables to be trained to defend their inalienable freedoms.
Okay.
So that's a lawful order that literally has gone all the way around, was decided by the people through a common law court, and is now established. So what we're simply doing, to be honest with you, Ben, is we want collaboration with the police, because we also believe, having had dialogue at all of the protests that I go to, I chat to the police commanders, Ben, and I always make contact with the police because I've worked with them significantly. So why would I do anything less than that? But what really becomes apparent is they certainly know what they're applying in terms of legality, in terms of statutes, acts, and legislation. But when you actually start to question them on what is lawful, they don't seem to understand what is lawful compared to what is legal. And see, for me, that's an information gap.
Okay. I'm familiar with that.
So why don't we fill that gap with education? Because that's what democracies do, isn't it?
I mean, I've seen you make that point, and you made this point about the difference between what is lawful and what is legal. That's probably an argument to be explored or reported on another day.
So we're also open to education. You know, all we want to do, right? All we want to do, Ben, is we want to see that the law is applied, mate.
Is the current government and the members of the government, are they committing treason?
Well, I can't say that, Ben, because I'm not that learned enough. Do you know all I want to do, mate, is I want to see people go about their daily lives. And I want to see some congruence in what these leaders tell us. Don't tell us not to wear masks, then to wear masks, and then pretend you haven't said that. And leadership for me is about clarity of purpose and also clarity of message, Ben. So for me, a great leader communicates an effective message that has clarity, and then if people don't really understand what it is, they're available to explain why. You see, so for me, when some of our academics are saying, why are you making these decisions, and we've got thousands of academics that are being silenced, what I can't work out in a democracy is why are we not having that open debate? Because isn't that what we stand for in the UK? You know, so for me, don't silence half of our academics, or don't silence people that have an alternative because you don't like it. Let's have the open debate and then come to a conclusion based on intelligence and education. That fact for me is what I love about the UK.
Okay.
And I can assure you, I would never support anything outside of that.
I just raised the T word, the treason word, because it is one which it seems to be frequently bandied about and used in Guardian's 300 discussions. And
that's what some of the guys use. You won't have heard me use that word at all.
And the only reason I raise it is because, you know, the sort of, I mean, you do talk about Nuremberg style trials, and the ultimate, so was medicine which was administered to those found guilty in Nuremberg was the death penalty as well.
I haven't said that.
No, you haven't. But you've called for Nuremberg style trials for people who are involved in.
I haven't called for that, Ben. I don't know where you've seen me call for that. What I'm saying is that we fought so that we would avoid. Nuremberg was established so that you can maintain your bodily integrity with fully informed consent if someone's going to compromise that.
All right. Okay.
So for me, how is that a problem? Because ultimately, that's a simple fact. You have the right to bodily integrity, and whether someone else, just because they're in government, feels that you should compromise that, well, actually, that's not what Nuremberg was about. What did I fight for? I issued the Surgeon General a notice of liability to say, please be aware that what you administer to our troops going forward, you're going to be accountable for personally. Why shouldn't he be accountable? I work with people, Ben, that have been compromised neurologically because of the vaccinations that they've had. Look at Gulf War syndrome, which is that's not something that Mick Stott created. That's something that I'm aware of. And actually, when I talk to a 41-year-old man that has Parkinson's, and the only thing that he's done since serving and receiving Parkinson's is had the vaccine for Gulf War, then, as a logical person, I could say, well, it might not be that, but it might be.
Yeah, I mean...
So why wouldn't I defend the Nuremberg Code? Why wouldn't I say, actually, we created that so that people couldn't exact these things on us?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, on the vaccines, I mean, it's probably one for another day. I mean, but the quote unquote big bad mainstream media were at the forefront of exposing the experience of those Gulf War veterans and the kind of the errors and the mistakes which were made, which led to their lives being kind of damaged as a result of what
ruined is at 41 years of age, Ben, and you've got a small family, and you now have Parkinson's. And if you look at how they were administered, bearing in mind I'm ex-forces, so I know exactly how they were administered to the Royal Marine Commando. It was literally every even number that was dished out to the Royal Marine Commandos. They got the vaccines and the others didn't. Now, in your wildest dreams, Ben, right, as a leader, do you ever contemplate the consequences of that? And if you don't, if no one ever says to you, are you aware of the responsibility of leadership? When you start to do that kind of stuff, and then completely deny that anything's happened thereafter, that's not leadership, Ben. That.
Yeah, I mean,
that's stupidity. In anybody else's camp, that's stupidity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't need to be a leader in my wildest dreams as far as my 2-year-old is concerned. But I suppose I only make the point about the vaccine in relation to Gulf War because I feel there is quite clearly a lot of misinformation being put out by people who are in relation to the current vaccines, which are in a very different category from those which caused the damage to those veterans. I mean, I suspect you and I are probably not going to agree on that one.
Look, I'm like this, Ben. I'm like this, Ben. Yes. This is what I stand for. If there are problems with vaccines and you have a narrative that supports them and you have a narrative that doesn't support them, then why not have an open academic debate? I'm more than happy, right, to arrange with you through The Guardian to get the SAGE panel to speak to all the other people that are being silenced. Let's see if that happens. Because for me, people should have the right to informed choice. And if you're only getting one narrative, and we've seen some of the decisions that were made in court around masks that were never passed down to any of the educators in the UK. If you look at some of the reports that are coming from top neuroscientists. Yeah. So all I'm saying is, well, why don't we have a flipping open debate?
I suppose the barrier to it is not least my pay grade, but also the fact that there's probably a disagreement as to whether people are being silenced or not. I mean, we would say nobody's being silenced. Ultimately, there is an academic debate.
So what happened to the judicial reviews that were presented because Ofcom told everyone in February 2020 that they couldn't report anything outside of the narrative? What happened to those judicial reviews around that? Because if you want, I can dig them out and I can send them to you.
Sure. I mean, I can tell you I'm not being prevented from reporting anything.
And you see, there are other court judgments, Ben, that have been completely ignored. So, I'm with you on one level, and I'm more than happy to contemplate the benefits of vaccines, and I'm also happy to contemplate the alternatives so that I, as a person, as a human being, have the right to choose.
The only thing, Mick, is it is a figment of anybody's imagination. If you really do believe that I or other journalists were being prevented from reporting things in relation to this pandemic.
Until something else happens that gives me the warm feeling that you're reporting the opposite, then I've got nothing to go off, Ben, because ultimately, I'd love to think that what you're going to do is report on our conversation fairly, because know what I stand for. So if the net result of that, and bear in mind, Ben, I've been on the receiving end in terms of the military. We sanctioned certain programs that went out there that were unedited and actually gave a very, very poor representation of what happened in the military, because sensationalism seems to reign in certain environments, and sometimes the truth is boring. Do you know what I mean?
I agree. Unfortunately, sensationalism.
And I'm not accusing you of that. I'm not accusing you of that, Ben. All I'm saying is, you know what I stand for, and I hope that's reported unfairly.
What I will do is what I always do, Mick, and report the facts. And just to give you an idea of what I plan to do. I mean, the idea of this article is in the week in which there is increased debate about the safety of people like Chris Whitty, and we've seen images of him being physically jostled on the streets, his house being marched on, and, for example, MPs calling for him to have police guards. That's now such a subject of political debate. As a result of that, we're looking into where the death threats are being made and who's making them.
Yeah.
And what I'm proposing to do, and I'm going to do, is report a piece which says, we are aware that multiple death threats are being made against Chris Whitty and various others, Matt Hancock, and we'll say on these various forums, and we, as part of this, will go to, we'll say we have gone to people who are the administrators of these forums. They include Guardians 300. It's organised by Mick Stott, and Mick Stott said as follows, and I've taken a note of specifically what you said in relation to, number one, you can't be sure that perhaps these were deliberately planted there by some people. Number two, you can't be responsible, you say, for policing all the content on it. And number three, there's an element of free speech as well, which you don't want to encroach on. And if I look back at my notes, I'm sure there are other points along those lines which you've made, and that's what I would intend to quote you as saying. I mean, I do have to say it, because one thing I don't want to do is enable you to sue me. I mean, that's the thing. I do want to report it accurately and.
Well, I hope you do, because fairly. I've recorded this conversation anyway, Ben. So I hope you do report it accurately, because I also want you to make sure that your readers understand that I do not condone violence on any level.
Yeah. Are you happy? Are you happy with what I've said in this conversation and what you've said, Nick?
Well,
is there anything that gives you cause for concern?
No, not really. I record conversations because basically what I find is that I come to people in earnest, and of course they have an interpretation of my conversation that might sell some newspapers. Right. And from my perspective, if you're a really responsible reporter, Ben, which I believe you are, then what you'll recognise is that, no, we can't police every comment, but the moment we find something that's going on that is not right, we would take that off anyway. And equally, it's very difficult to and by the way, I also understand that there are people out there that really believe that there wouldn't be such a thing as an infiltrator. But you have to remember, Ben, that on all the protests I've been, I've seen some of the crisis actors. I've seen how the police actually agitate the crowd to make them violent. And bear in mind, I used to work with them, so when people start to say to me, well, Mick, that seems a bit far-fetched, I've been on the other end of this. I'm a personal safety public order trainer. So I'm coming at this, Ben, from as fair an angle as I can come at, understanding that the police are under pressure, and they're being given sometimes unlawful orders. I've also seen escalations that didn't need to happen, that were created by the police. But equally, I can sort of go, this is not an easy scenario, and it's not an easy situation, Yeah. So all I'm going to ask you is that you report on it fairly, because ultimately I think you've got an angle of where I come from.
I hope that you'll find. Look, I hope what you read, what we report. I suspect you may not like it, but I hope you'll come away after reading it and think, fair enough. He's put these things to me, and he's given a fair representation of what I've said, and he's quoted me accurately, and he's not misquoted me. And because I've taken notes here, I'm familiar with what you've said, and you have your, as you say, you have your recording also to listen to. If you feel that I have misquoted you in any way, please do come back to me at that point. If you feel that you've been misquoted, or I have.
Well, I'll simply post it on every social media platform that exists, Ben, because I've recorded the conversation. And so, if you, I'm a great believer. I listen to language, and I don't have my interpretation of what you say. When you said to me, "I hope you think I'm going to report on you fairly." Well, I come from a perspective of why would you report on me unfairly? Because ultimately, when you say anything to me, I take you literally. Yeah. There's no inference. There's no inference. So I just want to make sure that there's no inference from your perspective with regards to the fact that we would never support anything that is violent or that threatens anyone, because we stand by the principles of common law. Cause no harm, no injury, no loss, and be honourable in your contract.
That's fair enough. No, I think that's fair enough, and I think we've gone over that. I mean, the point I hope that I have made to you is that I do understand you are not supporting anything violent, but
never would.
What I'm putting to you is the argument is that your platform is facilitating this type of hate speech,
and there's also a love on our platform as well.
You also love as well. That great, but
there's also a lot of support on there. It's interesting, Ben, that you notice.
Sorry, go ahead.
You notice one, but not necessarily the other. So I would say make sure your filters, when we all look for an angle in some way or another, and this is the importance of being objective. So I say, well, okay, you could argue that the angle is that we've set up a group as a focal point for people that want to be trained as peace constables, so that we can educate people in their basic freedoms and they can exercise those basic freedoms under common law. So
I suppose I noticed it because one cannot help noticing comments such as "send that person to the gallows" or "hope they hang." That really jumps out at you.
It jumps out at you, Ben, right? And the thing is, if we notice anything that encourages violence on any level, we delete it. And we do that as and when. But when you've got a lot of people, I mean, why don't you apply some of these rules to Facebook, Ben?
Well, Facebook we do constantly. We do criticise. We do report on Facebook, and we do bring these allegations to them on a regular basis, and they're on the back foot for failing to do that, and we report on that.
Well, I'm glad you do, because equally remember that as far as I'm concerned, you're also accountable for what you say about me. I want you to be honourable. I want you to be honourable in what you post, because I served for 30 years in the British Army. I put my arse on the line, Ben, and I didn't do it so that some people that are leading us could be completely incongruent in their messages, confusing in their messages, and lead us into this kind of space without proper justification and open academic debate. For me, that's one of the cornerstones of our democracy. And where I look at all of the documents, and I've had a lot of time to do it, I'm coming from what I consider to be a balanced perspective. Even when I was in combat, Ben, right, I used to look at Al Jazeera to see how they reported on some of the situations we were experiencing, so that I could triangulate my perspective and be objective. You see, for me, when somebody becomes radicalised, it's because they don't see other perspectives. And you see, that's the last thing we encourage. So when people come and train as peace constables, we're saying to them, right, okay, take a look at it from the police's perspective. Take a look at it from the government's perspective. Take a look at it from our perspective. And now you're halfway to come into a conclusion that serves everyone, which is exactly what we want.
Okay, well, it's fascinating stuff, and interesting territory, I mean, which probably strays beyond the boundaries of what I had initially called you about, but maybe for another day. But anyway, I've considered this conversation on the record. Mick, I mean, as I'm sure you have as well. It's interesting to hear you've recorded me. That's fine. Completely your right to do so. And it's within your rights to do what you want afterwards. I mean, I would say just...
But that's democracy, Ben, isn't it? I've got no problem with someone having an opinion of me, but at least make it a fact-finding mission. Don't read into it from your own perspective and assume that that's what's been said. Because you see, the problem with this situation is that's what people do.
I hope you'll find. I hope you feel I've been fair with you about this. I mean, I think we've been speaking now for about 40 or 30, half an hour, 40 minutes or so.
Well,
I mean, I haven't hopefully discounted what you've said. I haven't gone off and written anything without going to you, perhaps as some journalists are accused of doing, and. I hope that's something which you'll recognise anyway.
So let's just imagine that you have, and let's just imagine you write something that I don't like. What is my right for recourse with you individually, Ben?
Well, in the first instance, you come back to me.
Yeah.
And or we have a reader's editor, which you can complain to if you wanted to lodge a complaint. Mm-hmm. And then, ultimately, beyond that as well, you could go to. I suppose you could go to the editor. You could ultimately choose to take legal action if you feel that you've been, in any way, impudent. I mean, I'd like to think I've taken, actions to ensure that doesn't happen. And I hope that our conversation is has been one you find is fair. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, mate. And I appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, you know where we stand and you know what I stand for. You know my background, you know my pedigree. Yeah. And unlike the people that are currently leading us in this country, all you'll ever get from me is congruence in what I do. Because I do what I say I'm going to do.
Okay. Should we leave it?
Yeah, absolutely,
Thanks very
Ben.
much.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yep.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, and you, Ben, you take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.